Hi, I went to the cinema on Friday and I saw Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe entry, co-written and directed by Ryan Coogler, who was behind the previous Black Panther film, and with an all-star cast including Letitia Wright, Angela Bassett, Winston Duke, Martin Freeman, and many others. It follows on from the previous Black Panther film, except that T'Challa, the King and Black Panther, has died since the events of the last movie. He died of some undefined illness. And this has left both his family and his entire kingdom bereft. They have no one now to protect them. The title of Black Panther hasn't been passed on to anyone, while the Queen Mother has assumed the throne. But a new threat is presenting itself in the form of people apparently from Atlantis, led by Namor, who is seeking to wage war on the surface world for perceived transgressions in attempting to mine the miracle mineral vibranium, which is otherwise only found in Wakanda, and he attempts to seek an alliance with the Wakandans or war. It's an extremely long film. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and for the most part, you feel it. Big problem, I think, arising from the absence of Chadwick Boseman, who passed away a couple of years ago, um, tragically young, is that there simply isn't anyone in the cast who can, not only who can naturally take over the leadership of the movie, but who has the same charisma and presence that he had. He carried him on screen as he would, as a king. And there isn't anyone in the film who has the kind of gravitas that you need to center the entire film around. And the result is that it lacks a core and a protagonist for much of its running time. And I found most of the characters to be somewhat flat. Letitia Wright, nominally top bill, um, struggles, I think, with the role of Chala's sister, Shuri, who is a scientific genius, is very capable, but is struggling to cope with processing the loss of her brother. Um, and this avoids going into the way that production was damaged by her involvement. Firstly, she was injured in a serious accident, which meant that the production had to be restructured around her absence. And then she demanded and was given a significant pay rise in order to have a COVID vaccine because she has been vocally opposed to vaccines, completely ignoring anything to do with her character, who is a great scientist, and yet she is apparently much more invested in made up bullshit. So that was a stumbling block that I tried best to ignore. But the lack of focus, the lack of any sort of core for the story, is a major problem. The film spends a great deal of time talking about what a great loss T'Challa was to Wakanda, which is understandable, but it winds up kind of almost overpowering the rest of the film. I have some notes here. It felt very indulgent in that way because it's also talking about what a great loss Chadwick Boseman was. And although it's obvious that he was very close with the production of the previous film, that he was very well loved, it feels more like the film is a 2 hour, 40-minute obituary for him. Reminiscent of the time when the Oscars were absolutely certain he was going to win Best Actor because he had delivered a good performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and had been nominated. And he had died, so all the cards seemingly were stacked in his favour, and then he didn't win because it was assumed, well, obviously he will win. Obviously, he was a huge star, and I think that's been taken for granted by too many people. And they've just decided that he was a huge star. We only ever saw Boseman on the ascendant. We didn't know how far his star was going to rise and how quickly it might fall. And I think assuming that he was going to be an absolute titan was a mistake. Um, it's it's a disappointing film. The villain character of Namor, who's fortunately the actor in question, I can't remember his name. I found him very weak and uninteresting, quite flat and uninvolving. And already, I watched the film 2 days ago, and much of it has already slid off my brain. I found it the, the majority of the film is essentially about two fantasy worlds. One, an Afrofuturist nation that has concealed itself from the outside or put up a front of being comparatively uncivilized, but not advanced to the rest of the world, fighting against fish people. And it's very hard to get invested in this because it has almost no connection to the real world. We do get a few scenes set elsewhere, and we have the involvement of new characters like Riri Williams, who will be Ironheart and will effectively become Tony Stark's successor as the new Iron Man, Ironheart. Um, and Martin Freeman as CIA operative Everett Ross rather, has a few scenes. Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a cameo, and even Michael B. Jordan appears in flashback as his villain from the first film. But there's just nothing to grab onto. There's nothing to focus on. It's so shaggy and loose and distant that much of the time I was distracted and bored and uninterested. There should be other ways of telling this kind of story in ways that are much more graspable. And the result is, I think, very disappointing.